Lumberjack helped a starving Zulu child. The next day, 200 warriors lined up outside his lodge. Snow hit him like a fist when he opened the door. It came in sideways, hard and stinging, carried by a north wind that seemed to have no end. The pines groaned under the weight of it. Somewhere down near the frozen river, a tree cracked in the cold and split with a hollow boom that rolled up the valley like slow thunder. Elias Moran stood on the threshold of the foreman's lodge, boots planted in packed snow, and breathed in the bitter air. His ribs ached from the chill. His beard was stiff with ice. Every joint in his body hurt the way old rope creaked when pulled too tight. He'd spent 16 winters in the northern timber, and they'd all taken something from him. Fingers, friends, easy sleep. Pieces of his heart he hadn't realized were missing until he woke sweating in the dark and couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken his name kindly. The sky was the color of tin. The smoke from the bunkhouse chimney crawled sideways, pressed flat by the wind. Beyond the campyard, the forest rose in black columns, endless, patient, waiting to be cut. Behind him, inside the lodge, the stove hissed and snapped. A pot of weak coffee simmered, smelling of burnt grounds and old iron. The men would be up soon. Another day. Another stand of pine to fall. Another chance for someone to make a mistake and die under a ton of frozen wood. Elias pulled his cap down over his ears and stepped out fully into the morning. Snow squeaked under his boots, dry and sharp. His breath hung heavy in the air, then tore away on the wind. He walked toward the tool shed first, as he did every dawn, checking saws, wedges, chains. He ran thick fingers along metal teeth, feeling for chips. The familiarity soothed him. Wood and steel never lied. They never promised anything but the work they could do. He was halfway across the yard when he heard it, a sound so faint it almost vanished in the wind. A scrap of voice. Not a man cursing. Not a tree groaning. A thin, cracked thread of human sound, fragile as ice on a puddle. He stopped, turned his head toward the river, listened. There again, a broken syllable, a word he didn't know. Elias frowned, shoulders tightening. He looked back toward the bunkhouse. No one else was up. No practical reason to go toward that sound in this cold. Men who wandered off trail in storms sometimes vanished. You found them days later, stiff in snowdrifts, eyes open, staring at nothing. But the voice came again, weaker. He swore under his breath and angled toward the birch line at the edge of camp. The snow grew deeper with every step. It dragged at his boots, crept over the tops. The wind found gaps in his coat and sliced at his skin. Frost bit his eyelashes. He wiped them with the back of his glove and trudged on. Beyond the last row of stacked timber, the world shifted. The noise of camp faded. Only the hiss of falling snow remained, a constant whispering sound. A small ravine cut down toward the river, the banks crusted with ice. He heard the voice again. Close now. Just over the lip. Elias climbed the bank, boots slipping. He grabbed a branch, hauled himself up and looked down. She lay half buried in drifted snow, as if the storm had been trying all night to erase her. The blanket around her shoulders was torn and stiff. Her bare feet were wrapped in strips of bark and cloth. Her skin was a deep dark brown against the pale white snow, but her lips were an ash gray from cold. Her cheeks had hollowed inward, as if hunger had carved them with a knife. Her eyes opened when his shadow crossed her. They were black, bright even in near death, full of a stubbornness that looked familiar to him in a way that hurt. He slid down the bank, snow filling his boots, and knelt beside her. "Can you hear me?" he asked, voice low. Her cracked lips moved. He bent closer. "Water," she whispered. The word came out in an accent he had never heard in these forests, vowels rounded, consonants soft. "Please." Her breath smelled of emptiness, not sour, not rotten, just hollow like a man who hadn't eaten in too long. Elias looked at her feet. The bark strips were soaked and frozen. Toos swallow, skin split. He could see bone white through the cracks in places. He knew what another hour in this wind would do to her. "Damn it," he muttered. He slung his arms under her shoulders and knees, lifting her carefully. She weighed almost nothing. A bundle of sticks, a handful of cloth and bones. She groaned when his hands pressed her ribs. "Easy now," he said. "You're done walking." Her head lolled against his chest. He turned and began the climb back up, boots slipping, lungs burning. Snow slapped his face. The wind pushed against him as if trying to shove him back down into the ravine. With each step, he felt the familiar anger rise. Not at her. At the land. At the way it took without reason. At the way it always asked one more thing from men who had little left to give. He broke over the lip of the ravine and started toward camp. The girl in his arms, the storm closing around them. By the time he reached the yard, his arms shook with fatigue. Sweat froze in his shirt. His fingers had gone numb where they clutched the blanket around her. He kicked the lodge door open with his boot. Warmth hit him. Not much, but enough to feel like a blow after the white world outside. The smell of coffee and ash wrapped around him like a hand. Thomas the cook stood by the stove stirring the pot. He turned, ladle in hand. "You're earlier than—" The ladle clanged against the floor when he saw the girl. "What in God's name is that?" Thomas breathed. "Not a that," Elias grunted. "Get the blankets. And a pot of hot water. Not boiling. She'll die if you heat her too fast." Elias laid her on his bed near the stove. Her body shivered violently now, as if warmth itself was hurting her. Thomas scrambled to obey, pulling down a folded wool blanket, shoving more wood into the stove. The tiny lodge filled with louder crackling, the iron belly of the stove beginning to glow. Elias peeled away the frozen bark from her feet. The cloth clung to raw flesh. She gasped, grabbing at the mattress. "Easy, girl," he said. "Easy." Her eyes flicked around the room as if she expected it to vanish. Walls of rough pine log. Shelf with tins and ledger books. His axe hanging in the corner. The stove's dull orange glow licking the iron door. "Who is she?" Thomas whispered, already pouring hot water into a tin basin. Elias shook his head. "Don't know. I found her down near the river. She wouldn't have lasted another hour out there. She's—" Thomas searched for words. "She's not from around here." Elias looked at her again. That was the smallest truth in the room. Her hair was tightly curled, matted with frost near the edges. Her nose was straight and fine. Her lips were cracked but shaped in a way that seemed made for laughter, not pain. "Get some broth going," Elias said quietly. "Thin, just enough salt so her stomach remembers what food is." Thomas nodded and moved faster. The girl watched Elias work. Watched his big hands, rough as bark, dip cloth in warm water and press it gently against her feet. She winced, but she didn't pull away. He spoke in the calm, low voice he used with spooked horses and panicked green hands. "You're at Moran's camp," he said. "North Ridge. Timber country. There's a stove and walls between you and that wind now. That's all that matters for the moment." Her brow furrowed. She seemed to latch onto one word. "Camp," she whispered, accent thick on the vowel. "That's right." She relaxed just a little, as if the idea of a camp meant something to her. A group, not being alone. By the time the broth was ready, the lodge had warmed. He sat her up carefully, propping her against rolled blankets. Her bones were sharp against his hands. When he held the tin cup to her lips, she drank with terrifying greed, coughing when it went down too fast. "Slow," he murmured. "There's more." She swallowed, closed her eyes, then opened them again and fixed them on his face. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why what?" "You carry me," she said. The words came hesitantly, like stones placed carefully in a row. "You bring me inside. Why?" "Because I've seen too many bodies go stiff in the snow," he thought. "Because I'm tired of winter taking whoever it wants. Because once, when I lay bleeding in a logging road with a shattered leg, a man I barely knew dragged me 3 miles through a blizzard so my lungs could keep breathing." He shrugged. "Because you were there," he said. "And I was the one who found you." Her eyes studied him as if weighing that answer. Then she nodded, slow. "My name is Thandi," she said. "Thandiwe Ndlovu." Elias swallowed the odd shape of the name. It was like nothing in these woods. But it fit her somehow. Lean, strange, defiant. "Elias Moran," he said. "This is Thomas. You're safe here." She glanced at Thomas, then back at Elias. She didn't look convinced. But she didn't argue. The bunkhouse door slammed somewhere outside. Men's voices carried faintly through the lodge wall. The day was beginning whether he liked it or not. He stood reluctantly. "Thomas will stay with you," he said. "I've got a crew of idiots who'll cut their own arms off if I'm not watching." A flicker of something like amusement crossed her face, gone almost immediately. "Do not let her fall asleep too deep," Elias added to Thomas. "She does. You wake her. Talk to her. Make her drink. I don't want to lose her now we've dragged her this far." "What am I supposed to talk about?" Thomas said helplessly, glancing at her dark face, her strange eyes. "Start with the weather," Elias said dryly. Seems it's all this land gives us to discuss. He pulled on his gloves and stepped back out into the storm. Word spread fast. By the time he reached the tool shed, 2 of the men were already waiting, saws in hand, eyebrows raised. "Boss," Carl said, grinning with that narrow mouth of his, "we heard you brought yourself a lady friend in out of the snow." Elias grabbed a peavy and didn't smile. "She was dying," he said. "You'd have walked right past her." "Maybe," Carl said. "Maybe not. Hard to say. Hard to see much in this weather." He lifted his saw. "She looked like us?" "No," Elias said. "How no?" asked Piotr, the Polish faller, his accent rough but warm. "Like no one you've ever seen in these woods," Elias answered. "Dark as the inside of a kettle. Eyes like coal. She's from farther south than any of you can imagine," Carl snorted. "Plenty of dark folks down in the ports. Sailors, dock rats. What's one doing up here walking around half frozen?" "Maybe ask her when she can stand," Elias said. "Until then, you keep your mouth shut around her." Carl opened his mouth to say more, then seemed to catch something in Elias's eyes, and thought better of it. They trudged into the forest. The day was long and hard, like every day. Trees fell, chains snapped. Men cursed. Snow found its way down collars and into boots. At midday they ate bread stiff with cold and salted pork that tasted like salt and regret. By dusk, Elias's arms shook with fatigue again, this time from work instead of carrying another human being. When he came back to the lodge, snowmelt dripped from his cap. His beard was a crust of ice. Inside, the air smelled of stew and wood smoke. The stove pulsed heat into the room, wrapping him as he stepped in. Thomas sat on a stool nearby, peeling potatoes, humming tunelessly. Thandi was awake, leaning back against his pillow. Her cheeks held a faint color now. Her eyes followed him as he closed the door. "How is she?" Elias asked, tugging off his gloves. "She's stubborn," Thomas said. "Tried to stand twice. I told her you'd break my neck if I let her walk on those feet yet." Elias moved closer. Thandi's lips lifted slightly. "He is afraid of you," she said. "This big man afraid," Thomas snorted. "Anyone with sense is afraid of the foreman when he's riled." Elias poured himself coffee, then set the pot back carefully. "Where did you come from?" he asked her quietly. "How does a girl like you end up half dead in our snow?" Her eyes darkened. He saw the wariness rise like a wall. "Far," she said. "I can see that," he replied. "Far from what?" She stared at the ceiling for a moment, as if gathering pieces of a story scattered across too many miles. "From hills where the grass is high," she said slowly. "From land where the sun hits your head so strong you see light even with eyes closed. From where the cattle move like rivers. From where men in red coats came with guns, and men with pale faces told us the ground was not ours." The room seemed to shrink around her words. Thomas stopped peeling, knife hovering. "Soldiers," Elias said. She nodded once. "They took our land. Our homes. They burned kraals and fields. Some of us fought. Some died. The rest..." Her throat worked. She swallowed. "The rest walked north, always north. Away from the uniforms. Away from the guns. Across the ocean." Thomas blurted. She frowned, not understanding. "Ships," Elias said quietly. "Big wooden houses that float." "Yeah," she said. "Yes, we worked for a captain. Loaded cargo, cleaned. He brought us north. Father said there was work in cold places. Cut wood for his country. Make railroads. Always work," he said. Her lips twisted. "He did not say how cold," she whispered. "He did not say how empty." Elias felt something shift inside his chest. An old resentment, worn smooth by years, rubbed against this new story and broke in an unexpected place. "How many are you?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to his, then away. "Many," she said. "Not all made it. Some turned back, some..." She touched her chest briefly, as if counting ghosts. "Dead in ditches. Dead on roads. Dead in fields." Elias thought of the roads he'd traveled to reach this camp, the frozen ruts and lonely mileposts. He hadn't seen bodies in them, but he realized now he hadn't been looking. "And you got separated from your people?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "I scout," she said finally. "Go ahead. Look for food. For a place to cross the river." "Snow came, I lost the track. Lost myself." She inhaled shallowly. "I thought the land had eaten me. Like all the others." Her eyes drifted to him again. "You pulled me out," she said. The truth of that sat between them, heavy as fresh fallen timber. "You said you weren't alone," Elias said cautiously. "Your people. How far behind you are they?" Her gaze slid toward the window, where the sky had gone from lead to charcoal. "They follow," she said. "Always follow. They do not leave one behind." Elias nodded. It seemed a simple thing for her. "Hello." "Then we'll see them soon," he said. He didn't realize how soon. He slept badly, dreams full of hills he'd never seen and fires he had. When the first light of dawn leaked into the cracks around the shutters, he woke with a start, heart hammering. Something was wrong. The silence felt unnatural. The wind had died. That was the first thing. No moan through the pine tops. No rattle at the window. Instead, there was another sound. A low murmur, like a river of voices just beyond hearing. Boots in snow, cloth brushing against cloth. He swung his legs out of bed and stood, muscles protesting. Thomas snored on his cot. Thandi sat on the edge of Elias's bed, blanket around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the door. She wasn't startled. She looked like someone who'd been waiting for this. "You hear that?" Elias asked. She nodded. "It is them," she said quietly. A cold, unrelated to the air, slid down his spine. He crossed the floor, opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The sky was clear for the first time in days. Pale blue, brittle-looking. The snow had stopped in the night. It lay thick and unbroken, reflecting a harsh white light. And filling the yard, stretching down the slope and along the tree line, were men. Hundreds of them. 200 at least, maybe more. He didn't have the habit of counting men by the dozen. He counted trees, logs, loads. But the line of them was long enough to make his stomach drop. They stood in rough columns, 3, 4 deep. Their dark faces were lifted toward the lodge. Breath steamed from their mouths in white clouds. Some wore heavy coats patched together from burlap and furs. Others had blankets over their shoulders, tied tight. A few still wore pieces of uniforms Elias recognized, tattered red jackets, faded sash belts, buttons that had once shone. Many carried rifles, old ones, single-shot, iron-sighted. Others held spears repurposed from sharpened wagon iron. A handful had axes on their belts, the same kind Elias's men used, but handled differently, with an easy, professional weight. They didn't move toward the lodge. They didn't shout. They simply stood facing him, a dark wall against the white snow. Behind Elias, bunkhouse doors opened. Men spilled out half-dressed, boots unlaced, shirts shrugged hurriedly over undershirts. Faces pale with sleep and quickly flushing with alarm. What in Christ's name? Carl breathed, coming up beside Elias. His hand went instinctively to the rifle propped by the door. Elias grabbed his wrist. "Leave it," he said. "You see how many there are?" Carl hissed. "We're outnumbered 3-1. Maybe more." "Exactly," Elias muttered. "You start this, we don't end it." Piotr crossed himself quietly, eyes wide. Other men hovered, restless, fingers twitching near knives and tools that could become weapons. At the front of the assembly, one man stepped forward. He was tall, shoulders broad. He wore a long dark coat belted at the waist, threadbare but dignified. Around his neck hung a strip of red cloth, maybe torn from some officer's sash, now faded to a dull rust. A scar carved a path from his left ear across his cheek toward his jaw. Pale against dark skin, he took another step, boots crunching in the snow, then stopped a respectful distance from the porch. His eyes met Elias's. They were steady, measuring. Thandi moved past Elias then, gathering the blanket around her and stepping into the light. Her bare feet hit the snow and she hissed, but she didn't stop. She walked to the edge of the porch and stood there between him and the crowd. The men's heads lifted almost imperceptibly higher when they saw her. The tall man's shoulders dropped an inch. Tension easing. "Inko Sazana," he said, voice carrying clearly in the still air. "We thought the white man had taken you." Thandi smiled faintly. It transformed her face for a heartbeat, revealing what she might look like in a land without winter. "He did take me," she said in their own language first, then in careful English so Elias could understand. "But he carried me instead of leaving me in the snow." The tall man's gaze flicked to Elias and back to her. "You are well?" he asked. "I am breathing," she said. "I do not feel my feet, but I am breathing." He nodded once, as if that sufficed. Then he looked full at Elias, studying him the way two experienced woodsmen sized each other up on a logging road. "You are Moran?" he asked in accented English. Elias nodded. "I am." "My name is Kulan Dlovu," the man said. "I am of her people. I led these men from the south. We come for her, and for something else." Elias's shoulders tightened. "What's that?" Kula's gaze shifted to the bunkhouse, where Elias's men hovered like a pack of half-schooled dogs. "Work," Kula said simply. "We were told in the port there is always work where the trees are tall and white men cut them down." A ripple of uneasy laughter ran through some of the lumberjacks. Elias cut it off with a glance. "This camp barely feeds the men it has," Elias said. "You bring 200 hungry mouths and think we can handle that?" Kula's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "We do not ask you to feed us," he said. "We know how to sweat. We know how to carry loads. We know how to cut. Back home we cut for the white man's railroad. Here we can cut your trees, drive your logs, build your roads. All we ask is not to be left to die in your snow." There was no plea in his voice, only a flat presenting of terms. Carl stepped forward, face flushed. "This is madness," he snapped. "We let them set up here, we'll be starving by spring. It's hard enough now. We ain't a charity, Moran." Elias didn't look back. "You say you can cut?" he asked Kula. The man lifted his chin. "We have fought men and beasts," he said. "We have carried wounded brothers across miles. We have crossed water that wanted to swallow us. How hard can a tree be?" Pyotr snorted unexpectedly, then coughed to cover it. Elias's lips almost twitched. "A tree doesn't care," Elias said. "It just falls on whatever's beneath it. You misjudge a line, misplace a notch, and it breaks your spine. It doesn't matter how many kingdoms you fought for or how many rivers you crossed." Kula's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then you show us," he said. "You show us how you cut your trees so they do not break your spine. We are not fools. We learn fast. We do not want your guns. We want your axes." Thomas had stepped onto the porch by then, hat pulled low. "Elias," he murmured. "Company won't like this. They barely pay for the men we've got. We start housing a whole army. Some clerk in the city will send soldiers and questions we don't need." Elias knew he was right. The company counted coins tighter than any miser. Extra mouths meant extra risk. Extra risk meant less profit. Men like Elias were as replaceable as any felled tree, but he also knew what it looked like to find one human being in the snow on the edge of death. He'd carried her weight. He'd seen the line where life ended, and emptiness took over. He looked at the 200 faces watching him, men who had walked from burned fields and stolen hills, men whose backs were straight even in hunger. He cleared his throat. "There are empty cabins up the slope," he said, loud enough for his own crew to hear. "Old camp buildings from before the stream shifted. They're rotten, but they'll hold a stove. You can have those." Carl made a strangled sound. "You can't just—" "I can," Elias said without looking at him. "Because as long as there is work to be done in this valley, I'm foreman here. Until some clerk writes a letter to say different." He turned back to Kula. "You work," he said. "You cut, you haul. For every day's work, you get a day's rations. Same as my men. You don't steal. You don't start fights. You don't bring trouble from the outside. We have enough of our own." Kula's chin lifted. "And if we are cheated?" he asked. "If the scales are lighter for us because our skin is darker." Elias met his eyes. "Then you come to me," he said. "And I fix it." "My word." The air seemed to tighten around that sentence. After a long moment, Kula nodded once. "Your word," he repeated. "We will hold you to that, Elias Moran." Behind Elias, Carl muttered, "God help you when the bosses hear about this." Elias almost said, "God hasn't helped us in a long time." No reason to start now. Instead, he stepped off the porch, down into the snow between his men and the newcomers. "Settle in the upper cabins," he said. "Don't touch the company store. Don't go near town, not yet. Thomas will draw up ration shares. Work starts tomorrow. We rise with the light. Those who come late to the line don't eat." A low rustling murmur ran through the assembled Zulu men. Not fear, approval, recognition of a rule that made the world make some sort of sense. Thandi watched, blanket clutched tight, as her people began to move. They peeled away from their formation in disciplined lines, trudging uphill toward the abandoned shacks Thomas pointed out. Their breath rose in steady clouds. Their boots cut new paths in the snow. She stepped down onto the snow herself, teeth gritted at the sudden bite of cold in her feet. She walked to where Kula and Elias stood. "You spoke for us," she said to Elias. "I spoke for my camp," he replied. "Hope I didn't just hang everyone in it." She smiled, a real smile this time, if a weary one. "You tied your fate to ours," she said. "It is a heavy knot." He thought of the rope scars on his palms from years of hauling logs, of knots that held heavy things. "I've carried worse," he said. The next weeks carved themselves into the memory of everyone in that valley. The first day, the Zulu men swung axes. The forest watched. They were wrong at first. Of course they were. Their hands were quick and strong, but their aim wandered a hair too wide, a hair too shallow. They thought of trees as enemies to be hacked down, not problems to be solved piece by piece with geometry and patience. Elias walked the line, correcting them. "Not there," he said, catching Kula's wrist mid-swing. "You chop that way, the tree'll twist on the fall. Kick back, crush whoever's on the tow rope." Kula frowned, sweat freezing in beads on his temple despite the cold. "You're telling me a thing that does not think can plan how to kill me?" he asked. "I'm telling you it doesn't care who it kills," Elias said. "So we care enough for both of us." He reached for the axe. "Here," he said. "Watch." He drove the blade into the trunk precisely where the notch had to begin. Chips flew. The sound echoed, solid, deep, the sound he'd lived by for half his life, a music of impact and fracture. The Zulu men watched with more attention than many of his own crew. They watched his stance, the angle of his shoulders, the way his hands shifted near the grip. Then Kula took the axe back and copied it. Not perfectly, but closer. By midday, their strokes had a rhythm. Their grunts lined up. Steam rose from their backs, stripped to undershirts despite the freezing air. They looked like a river of muscle and will flowing between the trees. Some of Elias's men couldn't help but respect that. "Those boys swing like they're mad at the land," Pyotr muttered approvingly. "Can't blame them," Elias said. Nights were stranger. The camp that had once been only rough English, curses in a dozen European tongues, and the quiet clatter of cutlery now held new sounds. Deep voices singing low in harmonies that seemed to grow out of the ground. Words Elias didn't understand threaded through the trees. Names of far hills, of rivers, of battles fought under a sun that burned instead of bit. One night, unable to sleep, Elias stepped out into the crisp dark. The stars were cruelly bright. His breath fogged around him. He followed the song upslope toward the old cabins. A ring of men stood around a small fire, not too big. They were careful with wood, careful with sparks. They stamped their feet in time, clapped their hands in peculiar patterns that sent small shock waves through the night. Thandi sat slightly apart, leaning against a cabin wall, blanket around her shoulders. She still favored one foot when she walked, but she walked now. That was something. Elias stopped on the edge of the firelight. Kula saw him first. "You come to see if we are plotting to kill you," Kula said lightly. The words were neutral, the look in his eyes not. "If you were, I don't think you'd sing about it," Elias said. Kula actually smiled at that. "We would," he said. "We sing about everything, we must. Otherwise the sadness grows too big and cracks us open." Elias looked at the faces around the fire. Laughter and grief sat so close together, he could see them trading places between one verse and the next. "What are you singing?" he asked. "A song about a boy who drives cattle farther than he should," Thandi said from her place near the cabin. "He wants to show his father he is a man. He ends up in a river with a broken leg and no cattle." "It is a funny song." Elias listened. The melody had humor in it, but there was something else too, pride, stubbornness. "So how does it end?" he asked. "The father comes," Thandi said. He pulls the boy out. They go looking for the cattle together. Elias nodded slowly. "A happy ending then," he said. Thandi tilted her head. "Not happy," she said. "Just not the worst." The phrase slipped under his ribs and lodged there. Not the worst. He knew that kind of ending. Most of his life had been made of them. As winter deepened, food grew scarcer. The company had sent supplies 2 months back, calculated for a crew of 50. Elias had stretched them for 60 before. Now he was stretching them for almost 300. Every nail of dried fish, every sack of flour, every barrel of beans. He cut rations, starting with his own. He worked his men harder, trying to keep productivity high enough that the logging camp, when someone finally rode out from the railroad office to inspect it, wouldn't be shut down as a loss. His men felt the strain. Carl grew louder, angrier. "You can't keep doing this," he said one evening, slamming a tin bowl of thin stew on the lodge table. "I've been in these woods 7 winters, Elias. I've seen men starve with full storehouses because the company miscounted. We feed 200 more mouths and we're all going to be bones in the spring thaw." Elias rubbed his temples. "We're not feeding them for free," he said. "They're putting out more timber than half the old crew. Cool's teams are cutting deep into the north stand." Stuff we weren't going to touch till next year. And what good is timber if we're too dead to spend the wages? Carl snapped. Thomas shifted nervously by the stove, spoon forgotten. We're behind on the quotas, Carl, Elias said. You know that. We had equipment break. Men lose fingers, a flood in the lower creek. These men close that gap. They save this camp. Maybe save your job. Carl leaned over the table, jaw set. You've gone soft, he said quietly. Some little southern girl bats her eyes, and you throw the gates open to her whole damn tribe. Maybe you're sweet on her. I don't know. I don't care. But I won't freeze for strangers. Silence crashed into the room. Elias stood slowly. The chair legs scraped the floor. Say something like that again and you'll be walking south with whatever you can carry, he said. His voice wasn't loud. It carried anyway. I don't fine men. I don't dock wages. I cut them loose. You want to go? Go, I won't stop you. But as long as you're eating my food and sleeping under roofs I'm responsible for, you don't talk about my decisions like that in my lodge. Carl's eyes sparked. You think the company cares about you? He said. You think they'll take your side when they see what you've done? You're fooling yourself, Moran. Probably, Elias said. But until they come, it's me you answer to. Carl held his gaze another long moment, then grabbed his coat and shouldered past, slamming the door behind him. The lodge shook. The stove rattled. Thomas let out a low breath. Maybe you should have let him walk, he muttered. A man with that much hate will find somewhere for it to go. Elias stared at the door, jaw aching. I know, he said. Spring didn't come gently that year. It crashed into the valley in fits and starts. 1 week of thaw followed by another freeze. Snow turned to slush, then refroze into treacherous glass. Icicles fell like knives from cabin eaves. The river began to move under the ice, gurgling, then roared angry against its hard shell. The logs they'd cut all winter lay in massive decks along the banks, waiting for the big release. If they didn't get them into the water at the right time, they'd lose weeks, maybe months. The company would count every lost day. Elias moved through those weeks like a man with a stone balanced on his spine. He fought with the river foreman, a thin man named Haskins sent up from the city to oversee the drive. You've got more men than was authorized, Haskins said, frowning down the line of Zulu log drivers in strange borrowed cork boots, spikes hammered through the soles. And more logs than you thought I could cut, Elias said evenly. You want them on the river or not? Haskins wiped his nose with a damp handkerchief. If there's an accident, he said, if any of those foreigners get themselves killed, I'll have to answer questions. So tell your bosses not to start wars in other people's lands if they don't want those people walking north, Elias said. In the meantime, they're the best rope team I've got. They move like they're tied to the same line, it was true. On the practice runs, Kula's men treated the shifting, rolling logs like living things. They danced across them with a strange grace, shouting warnings, hauling stuck timbers free with ropes and peavies. They fell in, of course. Everyone did. But they came up fast, coughing and laughing. Eyes bright, Thandi watched from the bank, fists clenched. You don't like it, Elias said one afternoon, stepping up beside her. They should not waste their strength on someone else's timber, she said. They should be building homes for us, walls, fields. They will, Elias said. If the company doesn't shut us down, if we make the quotas. Work buys time, Thandi. Time buys space. Space buys choices. She looked at him sidelong. You talk like someone who has spent his whole life paying for a road he never got to walk on, she said. That about sums it up, he answered. The river broke finally on a Tuesday. Ice cracked like gunfire up and down the valley. Massive sheets shifted, rose, then snapped. The water boiled up brown and angry, carrying broken ice, branches, the odd dead animal. The first log deck went in with a roar. Men shouted, ropes creaked. The river accepted the timber and rolled it away, down toward the waiting booms miles downstream. By noon, Kula's team was in the thick of it. They moved like a single organism. Elias watched from the bank, anxiety a hard knot in his ribs. The river was no joke. It killed healthy men quicker than winter did. One slip, one foot caught between rolling logs, and a man's leg snapped like a twig. Fall under at the wrong moment, and the weight of the wood kept you down until your lungs filled. Cooley's voice cut through the noise, barking orders in his own tongue, then in rough English, left. Left, pull there! You, small one, jump. The small one in question, a wiry man named Sizwe, leaped from one log to another just as it rolled. He landed with a whoop, arms pinwheeling, then settled into a crouch, peavy biting wood. Elias felt a grudging pride swell in his chest. These men had taken to this savage. Beautiful work as if born to it, which was why what happened next punched him so hard. It started with a single log that wasn't where it should be. Carl was on that section of the river, along with 2 Zulu men. They were working a jam near a bend, shoving, prying, trying to get a stubborn cluster to move. "Hold that one," Carl shouted. "No, that one." His hand signals were sloppy, his temper worse. Elias saw the line of logs shift in a way that made his stomach drop. "Back!" he hollered. "Back off the jam." "That's not ready." His voice got lost in the roar. Carl stepped forward, putting his weight on a log that was already rolling. It twisted under him. He windmilled, lost balance, and went down between 2 massive trunks. Sizwe reacted first. He dropped his own peavy, lunged forward and grabbed for Carl's coat. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the jam broke. The whole section of river seemed to move at once. Logs surged, bumping and grinding. Water exploded upward. Carl vanished under the roiling wood. Sizwe's legs were swept out from under him. Elias saw his head go under, his dark hands still clutching Carl's collar. "Damn it," Elias spat. He kicked off his boots, ignoring the bite of snow on bare feet, and jumped onto the nearest log. The river was a living thing under him. It bucked and rolled. His calves screamed as he balanced. "Rope!" he shouted. "Get me a line!" Thomas, bless whatever God still listened to him, was already there. He flung a coil of rope. It arced sloppily. Elias snatched it from midair, wrapped it around his forearm, and began moving down the line. 2 heads surfaced for a moment between logs. Carl, pale and bug-eyed, mouth open in a silent scream. Sizwe, teeth bared, arm locked around Carl's chest, trying to keep his face above water while the logs hammered at them both. Then they were under again. Dragged toward the bend where the jam had broken, Elias ran. The logs shifted under him, trying to throw him. His toes dug into wet wood. Splinters stabbed his skin. He caught sight of them again near a semi-submerged boulder. Sizwe's face was purple. Carl's lips were blue. Elias didn't think. He dove. The cold was unreal. It punched the breath out of him. Needles drove into his skin. The river grabbed him, spinning him, slamming him against wood and stone. He fought his way downward, eyes open in the muddy swirl. Shadows thudded past overhead, logs, tons of them. He saw an arm, reached for it. Fingers slipped. He grabbed again, got hold of Sizwe's wrist. The man's grip on Carl had loosened. Panic flared. Elias kicked, trying to haul them both toward the light. A log smashed into his shoulder. Pain flashed white. He felt something tear. He almost let go. Then another arm wrapped around his waist from behind, pulled strong. They broke the surface together. In a chaos of foam and noise, Kulahik had a rope tied around his own chest, cutting into his ribs. Men on the bank pulled like demons, dragging them toward shore. They hit the shallows in a tangle. Elias stumbled onto gravel, coughing water, vision blurred. He felt hands grabbing him, hauling him higher. He rolled onto his side, chest heaving. Carl lay on the bank, eyes closed, lips purple. Sizwe lay beside him, gasping like a landed fish. For a terrifying second, no one moved. Then Elias crawled to Carl, shoved his hands hard into the man's chest, and began to push. "Come on," he growled. "Don't you dare die here. If anyone gets to kill you, it's me." Water gurgled from Carl's mouth. He coughed weakly, coughed again, then sucked in a ragged, wheezing breath that sounded like rusted hinges. The men around them sagged with relief. Sizwe rolled onto his back and started laughing, a wild, breathless sound. Kul stood over them all, chest rising and falling, the rope still taut around him. He caught Elias's eye and gave a single, sharp nod. "Now we are brothers," he said simply. "We have gone under the river together." Elias lay back on the stones, shoulder screaming, lungs burning, and let out a hoarse chuckle. "Brothers," he echoed. "Sure, why not? I always wanted more family." The joke dropped like a pebble into deep water, sending ripples he hadn't intended. After that day, something shifted permanently in the camp. No one could say the Zulu didn't pull their weight. Not after Sizwe nearly drowned, saving a man who'd spit on him days before. Not after Kula dove in after the foreman, like they'd been born on the same muddy riverbank. Even Carl, after he could walk without wheezing, avoided Elias's eyes, but stopped speaking his poison so loudly. Shame had crept into his posture, where arrogance had sat before. Still, peace never lasted long in the north. Word got out. It always did. A trader stopped for a night, thawing his horses in the barn. He saw the dark-skinned men hauling timber, heard their songs, watched them spend their wages on flour and tobacco. He carried that story north to the nearest railhead, where he traded it for whiskey and gossip. By the time spring properly took the valley, men in uniforms were riding into camp. Elias saw them from the ridge. 4 of them. Company men, not army, but that distinction was thin. Their coats were fine wool, their boots well-oiled. They rode good horses that snorted clouds into the warming air. With them was Haskins, the river foreman, looking nervous and self-satisfied at the same time. "Here we go," Thomas muttered beside Elias. The uniformed men dismounted by the lodge. One with a well-trimmed beard and eyes like wet stones looked around the camp with distaste. Elias walked down to meet them, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Afternoon," he said. "Mr. Moran," the bearded man said. "I am William Harrow, Regional Supervisor for Northern Timber. I hear you've expanded operations." "That's one way to put it," Elias said. Harrow's jaw tightened. "I also hear," he went on, "that you've taken it upon yourself to employ a large number of unsanctioned foreign laborers, armed foreign laborers, on company land, without contract, without clearance, without informing your superiors." Elias resisted the urge to glance toward the upper cabins. "They're not armed on the job," he said. "Company rules there are the same for everyone. Axes, saws. That's it. And they're not unsanctioned. They're men who work. They cut timber. They drive logs. They get paid. Isn't that the whole point of this operation?" Harrow's lips thinned. "The point," he said, "is to extract timber at a predictable profit, not to shelter displaced natives from some colonial dust-up 3,000 miles away." One of the other uniformed men snorted softly. "Look at them," he said under his breath, nodding toward a group of Zulu men carrying a heavy beam. "Whole tribes of the savages. God knows what diseases they carry. What habits?" Elias's hands curled into fists. "They carry scars and empty stomachs," he said. "Same as half the men you hire out of the ports. They also carry your logs, faster and cleaner than any crew I've had." Harrow's gaze hardened. "You've put this company at risk," he said. "Local settlers are already uneasy. They don't want warbands camped in their woods. And if a single one of these Africans hurts someone, it'll be Northern Timber paying the compensation." He took a breath, as if trying to keep his voice calm. "I am here to fix your mistake," he said. Elias felt the land tilt slightly under his feet. "What does that mean?" he asked. Harrow nodded at the man to his right. The man pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is an order rescinding your authority as foreman," Harrow said. "Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty. You will turn over your logs, your books, and your keys. A new foreman will be appointed, one who understands the limits of his role." The words hit harder than the river had. Elias stared at the paper. "The ink, the neat, indifferent script. So that's it," he said. 16 years up here. Every winter, every broken bone, every dead man I've buried. And that's what it comes to. A piece of paper in spring." Harrow's expression didn't change. "You exceeded your mandate," he said. "We cannot tolerate that. The men from the south will be escorted to the railhead. They can seek employment elsewhere, or passage home. It's not our concern. They won't survive it," Elias said. "They've got no coin left, no friends, no land to return to. You send them south, you're sending them to die on roadsides." Harrow shrugged faintly. "The world is full of tragedies, Mr. Moran," he said. "We are tasked with minimizing the ones we are legally responsible for." Elias laughed then. He couldn't help it. The sound came out raw. "You sit in an office and talk about tragedies like they're spilled ink," he said. "You ever pulled a half-frozen child out of a ditch? You ever held a man's hand while he coughed out the last of his lungs because a tree fell wrong? No? Then maybe don't lecture me about acceptable losses." Harrow's face flushed dull red. "You are finished here," he snapped. "Whether you walk out on your own, or we have you dragged out." Cool had seen the riders too. He appeared now at the edge of the yard, Thandi beside him, a handful of his men behind. They didn't approach too close, but they watched with predator stillness. Thandi's eyes flicked from Elias to Harrow. She was too far to hear, but she could see the tension, the posture. She understood. "They will take it all away from you," she said quietly to Kula. "They will send us south like broken tools." Kula's jaw flexed. "I will not walk back through the places we left," he said. "I will not see the burned kraals and the men in red coats again. I would rather die in this snow." Thandi's gaze slid back to Elias. "He gave us time," she said. "Now they want to take even that from him." She stepped forward, unable to stop herself. Kul grabbed her arm, but she shook him off. She strode into the space between Elias and Harrow. The company men started, hands going towards sidearms. Harrow frowned. "Who is this?" he demanded. "This," Elias said, "is the reason you have 200 of the best log drivers you've ever seen. I found her dying in our snow. The next day they were here. Not to take anything. To pay my mercy back with work." Thandi lifted her chin. "We have cut your trees," she said. "We have ridden your river. We have taken less food than we need so your stores last. We have done everything this man asked." Her voice was accented but clear. "Now you want to throw us away," she said. "You want to send us walking south until we fall down like dead dogs." Harrow shifted uncomfortably. "It's not personal," he said, as if that helped. "It's company policy. This is not an approved settlement. You're trespassing on private land." Thandi laughed once. There was no humor in it. "Private land," she said. "You did not plant this forest. You did not grow these trees. You did not make the river. You came with papers and lines on maps, and now you say it is all yours." Harrow opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't used to being addressed like this by anyone that wasn't another man in a coat like his. Kula stepped forward too now. "If you send us south," he said, "we will not go quietly. We will fight whoever tries to drive us. Maybe we will lose. We have lost before, but some of you will die trying to make us move." One of the younger company men shifted his hand. Closer to his pistol, Elias felt the air tremble on the edge of something. Irreversible, he stepped between them all. "Enough," he said. "Put your damn hands down. All of you. You pull a gun in my camp, I don't care what uniform you wear, I'll knock your teeth down your throat." They stared at him. "What are you proposing, Moran?" Harrow asked tightly. Elias took a breath. "You want me gone," he said. "Fine, I'm gone. You want the Zulu gone. They go. But they don't go alone." He turned to Kula and Thandi. "There's a valley," he said slowly. 2 days east. Abandoned cutting ground. Soil's poor. Trees are thin. Company moved on years back. They won't miss it for a long time. There's a river small enough for fish. Land enough for a few fields if you don't mind rocks." He shifted his weight, shoulder throbbing from the old river injury. "I'll take you there," he said. "We'll salvage what we can, tools, seed scraps. Stoves no one will notice missing. We build you a place, one that doesn't belong to any company. When the next winter comes, you won't be sleeping under someone else's roof." Thandi stared at him. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I can't stand the thought of you dying on the same road you walked to get here," he thought. "Because every day I don't do something to spit in the face of men like Harrow feels like I'm handing them my soul piece by piece. Because if they're going to throw me away after 16 years, he said aloud, I might as well leave them something they didn't ask for." Harrow's face had gone pale. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," Elias said. "Because after today, you said it yourself, I don't work for you anymore. You can't order me to do a damn thing." He looked at Kula. "You want that valley?" he asked. "It won't be easy. Soil's thin. Winters hit harder there. But no one will come to move you along." Not for a while. Kula didn't look at Harrow. Or the guns. He looked at Thandi. At the men behind him. At the cut logs, the river, the forest. "Will there be space for cattle?" he asked quietly. "Someday. If we ever have cattle again." Elias thought of the narrow meadow he'd seen there once, green for a few weeks in summer before frost came back. "There will be space," he said. "Maybe not enough, but some." Kula nodded once. "Then we go," he said. Harrow sputtered. "You can't encourage trespass on company land," he said. "We'll have you arrested." "You can try," Elias said. "You'll have to come find me in spring floods and black fly swarms." "I'd pay to see your boots in that mud." Thomas, who had been silent, stepped forward. "I'll go," he said. Elias turned, startled. "You're a terrible liar, Elias," Thomas said. "You were going to walk off into the woods with your rope and your axe and a half-healed shoulder and pretend you didn't want anyone to come along." "Well, I can't cook for Harrow. His face will sour the stew. I'll come east. Somebody's got to keep these people alive long enough to taste a proper meal." A low chuckle rippled through the Zulu men. Piotr lifted his hand. "Me also," he said. "City does not want man with my accent and my back. Forest at least honest. Shall I go help dig your rocks?" Elias swallowed. He hadn't expected this. He'd thought he was choosing exile again. Alone. It was the only thing he knew how to do. Now, suddenly, there was the shape of a different life before him. Still brutal, still cold, but not ruled by men with wet stone eyes and papers in their hands. He looked at Harrow. "You can write whatever you like in your report," he said. "Say I went mad. Say I fell in the river. Say the snow took me. Nobody down there cares what happens up here, as long as the logs keep coming. You cut a few more trees on the south slope, they'll forget my name." Harrow's jaw worked. He saw the truth in that. The insignificance of one foreman's life in the great machine. "Get off my camp," Elias said quietly. "You're scaring the men." Harrow hesitated, then swung into his saddle without another word. As they rode out, his coat flapped behind him like a black flag. The next week was a blur of quiet theft and stubborn resolve. Elias walked the camp with new eyes. Everything that had once been inventory now looked like survival. They didn't steal what would be missed immediately. No barrels of flour, no stacks of milled planks. They took things on the edges. A broken stove Thomas knew how to fix, bent nails that could be straightened, old rope, spare peavies, lanterns with one good pane left. At night they loaded sledges. Not as many as when Kula's men had first arrived. Just enough to carry what they couldn't live without. Blankets, tools. A sack of seed Thomas had been saving from pilfered grain. Thandi moved among her people, organizing with quiet authority. She knew who was strong enough to pull, who needed to ride, who would fall asleep on their feet if not reminded to rest. Elias watched her and knew, with a certainty that felt like stepping off a log onto solid ground, that whatever they built in that new valley, it wouldn't be his alone to shape. He could show them where the frost lay longest, where the snow drifted deepest, but it would be her voice they followed when it came to more than trees. The morning they left, the sky was clear. The sun sat low but bright, turning every crust of snow into shards of diamond. Elias stood on the porch of the foreman's lodge one last time. The bunkhouse was quiet behind him. Most of his old crew were staying. This was their life, their wages, their only path they could imagine. Piotr adjusted the straps of his pack, grunting. "You sure about this, old man?" Elias asked him. Piotr shrugged. "Life is cold everywhere," he said. "Here at least I choose which cold." Thomas stepped out, arms full of bread wrapped in cloth. "I left them a note," he said. Elias raised an eyebrow. "What did it say?" "That if they burn this place down out of spite, I'll come back in the night and season their stew with sawdust," Thomas said. Thandi approached, wrapped in a patched coat, feet bound in thick, fur-lined boots the men had traded for downriver. "Are you ready?" she asked Elias. He looked back at the yard, at the stump where he'd once sat to write pay tallies, at the tree line where he'd first seen her in the snow, small and lost. "I suppose I am," he said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know this land," she said. "We know how to live when people want us gone. Between us, maybe we can make something that does not belong to anyone else." He met her eyes. "That's the idea," he said. They walked east, 200 and some souls, dragging sledges and hopes and scars. The forest swallowed Moran's camp behind them, the buildings shrinking, then vanishing between the pines. The journey to the valley was harder than Elias remembered. The snow was deeper that way, untouched by the constant traffic of loggers. The hills were steeper, the river crossings trickier, but the Zulu men moved in formation, helping one another over the worst stretches. They sang sometimes when the work got too heavy, turning their exhaustion into a rhythm that kept feet moving. At night they built small fires and huddled close. Elias lay under the stars, listening to Thandi speak quietly to children, whose parents had died somewhere between the southern hills and these northern trees. She told them stories of rivers that didn't freeze, of grasses that whispered instead of cutting like knives. On the third day they crested a ridge and saw the valley. It lay like a bowl between low, tree-clad hills. The river curled through it, narrow but persistent, cutting a dark line through the snow. The old company cabins sagged near the north bank, roofs caved in places, doors hanging. The tree line here was thinner, the pines older spaced wider apart. Patches of rocky ground jutted through the snow like broken teeth. It was not beautiful in any way, a city man would recognize. It was perfect. Elias released a breath he hadn't realized he held. This is it, he said coolly, stood beside him. It is not home, he said. No, Elias agreed. But it's ours. They walked down into the valley. Work began without fanfare. Axes bit into cabin walls, carving away rotten sections. Men climbed roofs to patch holes with rough-cut planks. Women scraped old stoveplates clean, piling rust flakes outside as if shoveling away bad memories. Thandi organized the women and older children to sort stones from the strip of ground Elias pointed out as best for initial planting. They moved rocks into piles that would later become walls. Elias and Kula walked the perimeter, marking where fences would go, where watchfires might be set, where snowdrifts collected deepest. They argued sometimes. Kul wanted a wide-open central space for gatherings. Elias wanted narrower lanes to protect against wind. In the end, they compromised. The village layout ended up with both, a central clearing and a windbreak of staggered cabins. Nights were bone-deep cold, but the songs around the new fires sounded different than at Moran's camp. Less like mourning, more like a promise. One evening, weeks later, when the first patches of earth were finally free of snow, Elias sat on a rock above the river. Watching the water slide past, Thandi climbed up beside him without a word and sat, knees drawn up. Below, children were throwing sticks into the river and shouting, betting which would go under the ice along the bank and which would float. You ever think about going back? Elias asked suddenly. To the south, she said. Yeah, back to where the grass is high and the cattle move like rivers. She was quiet for a long time. I think about the taste of mango, she said. I think about my mother's hands, but when I close my eyes now, I see snow. I see this river. I hear these men calling each other by names they did not have before. Names they found up here. She glanced at him. You? She asked. You think about somewhere else. He considered. There was a farm once, he said. Not mine. My brother's. A field that stayed green just a little longer than the rest because of how the hill lay. A woman I was supposed to marry. That all burned in a war too. Different flags, different uniforms, same smoke. He watched his own breath curl. I came north so I didn't have to watch ashes anymore, he said. Funny thing is, the north burns you in different ways. Thandi nodded. You saved me, she said. That day in the snow. You could have walked past. Many did before you came. I heard their boots crunch. I tried to call. My voice was too small. He clenched his jaw. I didn't save you, he said. I just carried you from one kind of hard place into another. Sometimes, she said, that is enough. The air between them felt fragile. She reached out and touched his hand just once. Her fingers were warmer than his. I will remember that winter until I die, she said, not because of hunger, because for the first time since the redcoats came, someone who had power over us used it to give instead of take. He swallowed. I didn't have that much power, he said. You had enough, she replied. Enough to open a door. Enough to say stay instead of go. Enough to walk with us east when they told you to walk away. Below, a child's stick disappeared under the ice and did not come out. The boy who'd thrown it stomped and demanded a rematch. Elias smiled faintly. You think this place will hold? He asked. When the next supervisor comes sniffing around maps. When someone decides this valley's timber's worth cutting again. Thandi's eyes were steady. Maybe they will come, she said. Maybe they will try to move us again. But now, when that day comes, we will not be stumbling in snow, half-starved. We will have walls. We will have children who know this river better than they know fear. And we will have stories about a winter when a man at the north edge of the world chose to be more than the job they gave him. Her lips curved. Stories are harder to kill than people, she added. Once you put one into the world, it walks on without you. Elias chuckled softly. I'm not much for legends. Good, she said. Legends forget your bad parts. I want to remember all of you. The anger, the tiredness, the way you cursed at the river. He exhaled, something loosening inside his chest that had been tight for as long as he could remember. Well, he said, if I'm going to be trapped in a story, I suppose this one's as good as any. The sun slid behind the pines, throwing long shadows across their new home. Elias stood. Tomorrow we start the fence, he said. It'll be back-breaking work. Stones, posts, frost in the ground. You sure your people are ready for that? Thandi rose too, brushing snow from her coat. They walked from another world to get here, she said. What is a fence after that? They climbed down together, back into the noise and light of the valley. Years later, men working new camps farther north would talk about a village tucked in an old cutting ground, a place where the smoke from the chimneys smelled of spices they couldn't name, where songs rose at dusk that made the hair on their arms stand up. They'd speak of a tall, grizzled white man who cut timber beside dark-skinned warriors, and a woman with eyes like coal who judged every stranger by how they treated the smallest child. Some would scoff, say it was just camp talk, a tale told on long winter nights to make the work go faster. Others, who'd once seen a line of 200 men standing silent in the snow outside a foreman's lodge, would just nod. They'd remember the winter when hunger and mercy met in the cold, and refused to let go of each other. And somewhere in that hard valley, when the first snow of each new winter began to fall, Kalachas would open his door, breathe in the bitter air, and hear behind the hiss of flakes a faint echo of a voice calling out from a ravine. He would feel, every time, the weight of a starving girl in his arms again, and the uncountable weight of the lives that had followed her. He would stand a moment longer in the doorway, letting the cold bite his skin, then step back inside toward the fire, toward the pot on the stove, toward the small, stubborn world they had built, because he knew now why he had carried her, not to save her, to save himself from the kind of man who walked on,